The following program was pre-recorded.
This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Callie Williams-Yost is with us today. She is a workplace futurist, strategist, and author, and has helped global organizations and employees transform how, where, and when they work. Callie Williams-Yost, good to have you with us today on KFNX.
It's great to be with you, Bill.
Now, you were telling me, and I work in radio, which is kind of like working in sports in the sense that try as you might, if you're a Major League Baseball player, you still have to show up at the stadium. You can't. There's no way of working from home with that kind of endeavor. And here we usually have to be in the studio. But you were telling me, and I think a lot of people are under the impression that a lot of this working from home stuff started in COVID. But you're telling me this has gone on for quite a while.
Yes, and I think that's something we don't talk about enough, which is work was already becoming flexible before the pandemic. It was a trend that was already well underway. In fact, our own national research showed that 1/3 of U.S. full-time workers in 2018 said they did most of their work from a remote location, not on their employer's work site. And actually 97% of people said they had some degree of flexibility already. So what COVID did is it accelerated a trend that was already well underway to its most extreme application in many cases, fully remote. And it was executed in a very chaotic and non-intentional way. So this is not what a thoughtful, well-executed, flexible work strategy looks like. And so where we have to go now is we have to think about what are the aspects of the work that we've learned could be done flexibly, effectively over the last 3 years. Keep that, but add back in the things that are definitely missing and that could benefit from some more in-person interaction. But that means that there will be some combination of on-site and remote, and that is actually what organizations should be looking at now.
Now, I grew up with command and control parents who were a product of their generation, and they thought if you're going to work, you were supposed to be at your desk at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, no questions asked. What's wrong with that philosophy?
Well, I think what we're seeing now, Bill, is there is this recognition on the part of leaders that perhaps there were some things that were lost in that transition to fully remote that are important to be sustainable. So things like being able to learn from being in person with other people, or being in the same room to launch an engagement and plan what that's going to look like. There are just certain aspects of the work that maybe indeed are better done when you're together in the same room. But the problem is the way they are approaching executing that is they are deciding that the way to get to that point is to mandate days in the office. That just by being in the office a certain number of days, these things will happen. The problem is, on the other side of that equation, you have a workforce that for over 3 years, in many cases, have worked in a fundamentally different way outside of that place-based work model. And in their minds have done quite well. And there are a lot of organizations that posted some of their best years financially over the last 3 years. So it's not computing for people why. Why am I coming back? Because what's missing is organizations are not leading with the work when they make these decisions and figuring out how and where that work is going to happen best. They're leading with the days. And they're saying days are the equivalent to having those outcomes they're trying to achieve. And that is not the case. So the struggle now is how do we move beyond what I'm calling this clash of contexts? Leaders for whom the context is work happens in the office, and for a workforce that has not perhaps been in an office for 3 years, meeting in the middle and co-creating what this high-performing version of flexibility is going to look like for that business.
Now, is it a generational thing? I mentioned, and my parents have both passed, so they're not around to deal with me anymore. If they heard me describe them as command and control parents, it might be an awfully long dinner on Sunday. But how much of this is generational, and how much of what was generational was about control as opposed to outcome?
So, I think it's more complex than just making it about generational divisions and a sense of command and control. I think there are legitimately people who did grow up in a period of time where they did go into an office and they did what their manager said. And that was how they worked. And so that's how they understand work to happen best. But on the other side, there's a whole group of multi-generational people who, for the last 3 years, have worked in their minds very successfully, working very flexibly. And so they don't have that same understanding of why you have to come into an office and do your work. And that is perhaps especially true for young people who, in many cases, maybe have never even worked full-time in an office, and also very much prioritize their personal life and being able to fit their work and life together in a way that doesn't necessarily preclude being in person in an office, but there has to be a purpose to it. And they want to make sure that there is value for them being in person together, and also they understand the value of being able to have that flexibility. Now, the challenge here and the opportunity is for each context or for each different way of understanding work, for being willing to step beyond that. So if you're used to being in an office and you think that's the best way, be willing to consider other ways of working. And if you think there should be irregular or very limited amount of in-person interaction in an office, give yourself the chance to step back and listen to what people are saying to you about how that's valuable. How by being in person and learning from somebody who knows more than you do could actually help you be a better professional, or by developing those relationships that come with being in person with other people, your peers, how those relationships are important and can be carried forward into your whole, the span of your entire career. And so, again, I think we have to be willing to meet in the middle, listen to each other, and take the best of what both groups are saying and create what's going to be next.
Callie Williams-Yost is with us. She is a workplace futurist, strategist, and author, and works with global organizations and employees in terms of transforming how, where, and when they work. Callie, I had something interesting happen recently. I was talking with a woman who is an administrator in a college, and she said they have offered classes by computer. She said the students, a lot of whom work from home, are rejecting them, saying, no, I want to get out of the house. I want to be in the classroom. I want to be with other human beings. So it can have an interesting ripple effect in terms of the fact that there are some people who are starved for human contact because they are at home all day working from home.
And that brings up a really good point, Bill, which is, again, this was a crisis-driven execution of flexibility in its most extreme form, full-time remote. Most people don't want to work fully remote. They really don't. And so what you're seeing now is these are young people who are saying, I do want to be in person. There is a purpose for me to be in that classroom learning and being with my peers and learning from my professor. However, what's interesting, a couple of my clients are universities, but there are still aspects of that learning that some of these students are saying could be done virtually. So perhaps the professor could put a taped lecture on their system that they watch in advance, and so the time in the classroom is really much more dedicated to that interactivity and asking questions. So what's really coming out on the other side of this is, how do we innovate? How do we take the good stuff that we kind of didn't think could happen in a more virtual, remote way? How do we leverage that and keep that, but add back in what really matters and it has the most value from being in person? And so I do think that this kind of all or nothing, it's either full-time remote or we're in the office, is keeping us from that meeting in the middle and truly innovating.
It's a hybrid system that we will probably eventually arrive at for a whole bunch of different reasons. Callie Williams Yost is with us. She is a workplace futurist, strategist, and author, and we are talking about the flexibility in the workplace in terms of whether you are in the office 100% of the time or working remote 100% of the time. We will continue in a moment. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Callie Williams Yost is with us. She is a workplace futurist, strategist, and author, and has helped global organizations and employees transform how, where, and when they work. Callie, I recall hearing years ago, and with some of these things that might be urban legend, but the Harvard Business Review was quoted as saying only 5% of all employees are able to work effectively without supervision. Have you found that to be true?
Well, it's interesting you bring this up, Bill, because what this new post-COVID flexible reality that we are grappling with tells us is that more than ever, we really do have to have great managers. Pre-COVID, what we found is most managers in most organizations were not managing particularly well. Oftentimes they weren't trained. And so to be able to work on your own without any supervision at all, that's tough when you work in an organization that you have to coordinate with others, where you have to have priorities set for you. I think everybody can benefit from that, but that does require having a manager that is doing all those things. And when you have a flexible work team and you're leading people who are working across different places and spaces and time zones, you really do have to be effective at setting priorities, at making sure you're engaging people, that you are coordinating the way the work is getting done. All those things that a manager has to do now really, really, really does have to happen. And so one of the priorities going forward needs to be giving managers the skills to play their role effectively, and making sure that people on the other side, the employee, also is clear about the skills they need to bring to the table. Because when we are working flexibly, we can't just say, I'm going to work, and you show up and you walk in the door and, that you're at work and then you leave. It really is more incumbent upon you to also be prioritizing your work and making sure you're communicating with people and understanding what your priorities are. So in this flexible work reality, we really have to have a culture of shared leadership where we are each playing our role effectively, and that's what's going to ultimately allow this to be successful.
Now, my wife's mother used to always say to her, I'm about to lapse into the German here. She always used to say to her, but René, it's work. It's not supposed to be fun. And that, I think, scarred my wife, and she retained that for the rest of her life. But what about employee happiness and satisfaction and longevity? Does the whole concept of flexibility play a role in that?
It does, Bill. And in fact, if you look at studies before COVID, people were already prioritizing flexibility in what they were looking for in a job. And now can you imagine on the other side of COVID, now that really is solidly one of the top 3 factors people are looking for in their workplace. Now, I have to say this, people are smart. They really are only looking for flexibility that makes sense for their jobs. Okay, people get it, what they need to do to be successful in their work. So it's not like everybody, the baseball player, is looking to be fully remote. They understand how they have to do their jobs, but they want to be able to have that flexibility in that context. Now, here's what we have to also understand. Employee engagement, it has been proven upside down, backwards, and forwards that employee engagement directly impacts performance of an organization. And so it really is incumbent upon the organization to find a way to provide what people are looking for in a way that works for the business and for them, because then you have that engagement that is so valuable and so important to your overall performance. And so, yes, work is work. It's never going to be, kicks and giggles every minute of every day. But if you feel like there is a purpose to your work, that you are, given the priorities that you need that make sense, and that you have that flexibility to get your job done and manage your life, there will be an engagement there that does pay off. And it has been proven in the research, and it's something that every organization on the other side of COVID needs to begin to craft in partnership with their employees.
Callie Williams-Yost is with us, workplace futurist, strategist, and author who has helped global organizations and employees transform how, where, and when they work. Callie, as we wrap up today, and we've got several minutes left, but what I wanted you to speak to is taking all of this into consideration, working remotely, working in the office, the way the modern or contemporary worker views work and the corporate environment. How do corporations need to look at the work that they do, regardless of where they're doing it, to be able to properly evaluate the kind of outcomes that they want and whether or not they're getting them?
Again, great question, Bill, because one of the other secrets before the pandemic was we didn't do a great job of measuring productivity and performance in many instances. And I think this is now an opportunity to step back and say, what is it that we're really measuring? Now, on a broad scale, an organization really does want to look at those engagement metrics. You want to look at how your those employee pulse survey scores and see how your employees are, feeling in terms of the level of trust that they are being given and how they feel their work is being organized and tasked to them, and do they have the resources they need? All those things are very important and should be monitored. But even deeper down, you want to start to look at things like, what is the quality of the work that we are producing? How are people feeling in terms of their ability to fit their work and life together? What is it how are they able to coordinate with each other and communicate with each other? Do they have the technology they need, and do they know how to use the technology so that they're able to get their work done effectively? And are they able to choose where they do what work best? Where? So, for example, if you have a particular type of work that you actually do better when you are not in the office, like a deep thinking report, or even in some cases private phone calls that you don't really want to have in an office, those things are perhaps better done when you're not in person. But what are the aspects of your work that you do find are more effective and efficient when you are in person, like that mentoring, like that effective engagement planning and project management? All of these aspects of work really do then drive how, when, and where they happen best. So another example would be all those people who, for the most part, need to be on site. We're finding there's some creativity around things like even scientists, R&D scientists, who are realizing, I obviously have to be in a lab, but there are days I'm analyzing my data. I don't have to be standing in my lab to do that. So even looking at people who, for the most part, need to be in person and being creative about what aspects of that work are required to be on site, but what aspects could give you some degree of flexibility in when and where you're doing it. So again, it's all about stepping back, looking at the work, having a consistent process that allows the individual businesses in an organization and teams say, what are we doing and how, when, and where do we do this best? And begin to experiment. We're entering a period of experimentation and learning. And on the other side, you will have a work model that works for the organization and for your people.
Callie Williams-Yost, thank you. Fascinating discussion today. Callie Williams-Yost is a workplace futurist, strategist, and author. Callie, if people want to find out more about these subjects or more about what you do and your writings, how can they go about doing that?
Well, Bill, you can check us out at the flexstrategygroup.com. That's FLEX strategygroup.com. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm always posting things, and I would love to connect with you there.
Excellent. Callie Williams-Yost, Thank you. Appreciate your time today and a most informative discussion. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX.